Hello everyone, my name is Sourabh Mishra, Faculty of Anthropology Optional. Welcome to KGS IAS. Now in today's session, we'll take a topic from anthropology and try to explain what it means, what are the various anthropological perspective about it, and how it creates the base for the subject, right? The topic here is culture. Now in culture, if you see the syllabus, we have topics like concept of culture, characteristics of it, ethnocentrism, cultural relativism, difference between culture and civilization. So we'll briefly touch upon all those aspects and try to see culture as a story of 150 years. Now, what is culture? This is the question which somehow led to the foundation of this subject, right? Whoever has studied anthropology, they have heard about E.B. Tylor. E.B. Tylor, in his work Primitive Culture 1871, talks about culture, and he has given a definition of culture we all use, right? So from there we'll try to see how culture and the perspectives related to culture has evolved over the period of time, and what do you actually mean by culture, right? So one question which took around 150 years, and still there are aspects, it is evolving, still it is evolving. What is the question? What is culture, and does every society have an equal right to live by its own? Now the question is, what do we mean by culture? It is the way of life, right? Way of life means the way we conduct ourselves, the way we lead our life. For example, what do we eat? What kind of food do we eat? What kind of clothing we have? What kind of shelter we have? Or what kind of institutions we follow? What kind of rituals? What kind of symbols? All of them combined together is part of culture, right? But the another question is, there are variations, right? Not everyone is living similar. There are way of life which is totally which may be totally different from your way of life, right? So if some community has a way of life, do they have the right to continue it, or we can put some universal restrictions on their way of life? We'll try to explore this question going forward, right? But before that, let us see some basic aspects of culture, that how do we define culture. The first step of knowing something is the definition, right? So we will take, there are various definitions given by different anthropologists according to their studies in different communities, right? But one of the most accepted definition is given by E.B. Tylor in his work Primitive Culture 1871. What is that definition? Culture is that complex whole which includes knowledge, belief, art, morals, laws, customs, and any other capabilities and habits acquired by man as a member of society. Now the last phrase is very important, where E.B. Tylor was listing the aspects of culture like knowledge, belief, art, moral, law, custom, but he might have understood that there are other aspects of human life which may be included in the culture itself. For example, any kind of habit which you have acquired as a member of society, any kind of capability you may have acquired as a member of society. Very basic example, for example, you are using currency in your day-to-day life, right? Not all the societies may have currency. It is a feature of an advanced society, but being a part of an advanced society, what you have done, you have learned how to use currency. Now that has become part of your culture. So culture is not only about the way of conducting yourself, it is political, it is economic, it is social, it is symbolic, right? All of your aspects, whatever you are doing in your life, is part of culture, right? So this phrase, any other capability and habit acquired by man as a member of society, tells us few basic things, that culture is not inherited, it is acquired. Acquired means what? That you have learned something being a part of a society. Now the society teaches you how to conduct yourself. We call that process as socialization. What do we mean by socialization? That the society is telling you how to behave in public or how to behave in your private sphere, right? So that is socialization. There are other processes like enculturation. where a family is trying to inculcate certain values within the newborn or the child, right? For example, a newborn doesn't know how to eat, what to eat. What we are doing, we are training them what are the edible things you can have, or how to communicate whatever you are thinking. So teaching of language, all of these are part of enculturation with which the family is doing. And with that, there is larger socialization is also happening through neighbors, friends, educational institutions. So all of the media, so all of them are trying to create a individual which can survive in a setup, in a social structure, right? That is socialization. Now this socialization is not something which is biologically inherited in the individual. We are learning it according to the context we are provided. For example, the part of the society, the community we belong to teaches us these things. That is nothing but socialization. So E.B. Taylor's definition, if you deconstruct, you get major claims like culture is complex whole. The first word which E.B. Taylor is saying, culture is a complex whole. It is not a list of things which you can conclude that this is culture. It is integrated as in each and every part of your way of life is interlinked with each other and interlinked with the society at large. So it is a complex whole. It is not something you can enlist. So one thing we understood is the complex whole. Another, it is universal. For example, in each and every society there is culture. Now that culture may vary from each other to a large extent, but still they will have element of culture in it. So it is a universal thing. Also, it is acquired, as I earlier mentioned, it is not biologically heritable. It is acquired as a member of society. So you will have to live through the process and learn and acquire those aspects of culture to inculcate yourself or be familiarized with the way of life of the larger society, right? So these are some basic things which we can extract from the definition of E.B. Taylor. Now, E.B. Taylor has given it most, you can say, holistic way he has defined it. Now, other thinkers are also there who has defined culture in a very different way. For example, when Malinowski, a functionalist, defines culture, he sees that how the elements of culture fulfills basic human need. So, because they are looking from the lens of functionalism, whatever institutions we have are fulfilling certain functions. That is why they are existing. Otherwise, they will cease to exist. Now, if a symbolic anthropologist like Clifford Geertz or Victor Turner, they will see from the symbol of or through the lens of symbolism, right? So their definition would be different. So each and every thinker, depending upon their observation, they have concluded or they have defined culture according to their understanding, right? But at the basic level, when we are studying culture, we'll refer to this definition and try to understand it in a bit complicated way. So next, what are the, after knowing the definitions, we generally try to see the feature of something or the characteristics of it. Now, UPSC also has asked previously a direct question that what are the attributes of culture, what are the characteristics of culture, right? Now, if you look at this, in this particular slide, I will try to explain you, whenever you are writing an answer for anthropology, it should be subject specific. For example, you cannot write something which is very generic. A lot of people, when they explain characteristics of culture, they enlist these characteristics like it is learned, it is shared, it is acquired, it is symbolic, it is integrated, dynamic, universal, cumulative, adaptive, etc. Right? So I have taken only 8 here. You can extend that further as well. But my point is, whenever you are writing something, it needs to be substantiated. How can we do that substantiation? Let us see that. Now, when you are writing that culture is learned, it is acquired through socialization, people are not born with it. So this is one characteristics you are writing. It is very important that you mention here that it was given by E.B. Taylor. And if you remember, you can write the work of E.B. Taylor as well as Primitive Culture 1871. Now, by using thinker as a passing reference, what you are doing here, you are saying that it is not only a generic understanding from where this characteristics is coming. I know exactly from which definition it is coming. Because just now we saw in E.B. Taylor's definition, he is clearly saying that it is capabilities or habit which are acquired by man as a member of society. So we understood that it is learned, it is not inherited, right? So you can easily quote E.B. Taylor in this particular characteristics. Next is symbolic. It is transmitted through language and symbols. What are the symbols? Symbols are something which has one, their own meaning, and second, they have associated meaning as well. For example, if you see a tricolor cloth, now for someone who does not know about India, lives outside, they may not see the symbolic value of it. For them, it is just a piece of cloth. But for an Indian, it evokes a feeling of patriotism, because we know that it is a national flag. It is symbol of national flag, right? So this way, any symbol will have its direct literal meaning and also an associated symbolic meaning, which is specific to that particular culture. It has a contextual understanding, right? So thinkers like Geeds, Clifford Geeds talks about symbolism. Victor Turner talks about symbolism. So when you are writing this particular feature, you can directly quote Victor Turner and Clifford Geeds, right? So this way, what you are doing, you are making your answer subject specific. Fine. Next comes adaptive. It changes in response to the environment and the new challenge. When we proceed further, we'll talk about various theories related to anthropology, and you will understand the concept of culture ecology, which was given by Julian Stewart. What Julian Stewart says, that every culture is developed according to its environment. So it is totally dependent on the environment where they are living in. For example, if someone is living in a hilly area or cold region, their way of life will be very different from someone living in a plain area, right? Because the temperature will be different, humidity will be different, so the kind of crops they are growing will be different, so the kind of food they are having will be different, right? So every culture, when we see from the ecological point of view, we will see their practices will be different from each other. So that is culture ecology given by Julian Stewart. Then culture is shared, it belongs to group, not the individual. It is transmitted socially, given by Franz Boas. Historical particularism, specificity of a particular culture. From there itself, the concept of cultural relativism came, right? Integrated, it is a parts from the coherent system. Any change in one aspect will affect the other, given by Malinowski, a functionalist. Culture is dynamic. You can quote Mead as well, or in this we have given you Ogburn's culture lag, which shows uneven change. In the contemporary relevance of culture, we will talk about William Ogburn's contribution and culture lag. So you can quote William Ogburn here in dynamic. So what I'm trying to say here, that every concept when you are reading, definition will give you the basic understanding of the concept. Characteristics will give you the scope or various features which are derived from the definition itself. That derivation you need to understand, then you will not have to mug up the list of characteristics. And also when you are listing 10 characteristics, it is very important that you quote thinkers, that from which work do you see that characteristics coming. So it will make your answer subject specific. So I hope this slide is very clear, characteristics of culture. Let us move on to the next slide, which talks about difference between culture and civilization. Very briefly, I'll try to explain you what it means. So culture is, again, as we understood, it is the learned behavior of a society, which includes material and non-material as well. What do we mean by material and non-material? You can also categorize this as tangible and intangible. Tangible aspects are those aspects which you can touch and feel. For example, this board is tangible, I can touch it, right? This pen is tangible, I can touch it. But if I have some ideas, those ideas are not something which we can touch and feel. We can understand the idea, we can communicate the idea, right? So that becomes non-material aspect of culture. So material, non-material, tangible, non-tangible, if you understand this difference, then you will be able to understand the difference between culture and civilization, because civilization mostly talks about the technological and material achievements of a society. So when you talk about a very primitive society, naturally their technology or material aspects have not evolved so much. But when you talk about a complicated society, complex society, then there are a technological advancement, there are advancement in terms of material aspects which you can directly relate to, and you can say that this you can say culture has developed to a civilization. The civilizations like we all have studied in our history, Indus Valley civilization, Harappan culture, right? So the aspects of urban planning, drainage system, standardized weights, these all are the material aspect which can be touched and felt, right? So this may include writings, large cities which has developed, technology of agriculture, metal tools, law codes, all of them are part of civilization. So anything which you see, if it is tangible, it is part of civilization. If it is non-tangible, mostly it goes towards understanding of culture. But also you need to understand that culture includes civilization also. It is just that civilization is giving evidences for that particular culture. For example, when we do archaeological excavation, what do we get? We get material evidences. For example, pottery. Now when we date back that pottery and understand from which time it is coming from, the pottery tells us that at that time people were using utensils, right? So the way of life is deciphered by the material evidences which you are getting from archaeological evidences, right? So culture and civilization goes together, but the material aspect changes differently, cultural aspect changes differently. We will again in further slides we will discuss about culture lag, where we will understand this differences in a much better way, right? So this is a direct question UPSC generally asks, that they want you to explain the differences between culture and civilization. So if you have basic understanding how civilizations are different from culture, you can explain that, right? So every civilization presupposes culture, but not every culture produces civilization. There are primitive culture also. For example, a isolated tribe living in an island, suppose they are totally isolated from the mainstream society. Now they will have culture, they may not have civilization, because it is not connected well, it is not created cities or complex social structure or complex social institutions they have still not created. So they will have culture because they will have a way of life, but they may not have civilization. So we need to understand the difference in this way so that we can explain it in our answer. I hope this part is very clear to you. Now let us move on to the next slide. Now comes the idea of ethnocentrism. What I am doing in this particular video is trying to give you a gist, or you can say a basic trailer of what all topics include in the section of culture unit, right? Definitely when we take the elaborate class, these discussions will be much more elaborate, but very briefly, if someone wants to know that what includes in our syllabus, they can understand through this syllabus, this particular video, right? Now what is ethnocentrism? The problem is judging others by your own rules. Judging others by your own rules. For example, suppose you are a vegetarian, right? And your friend is non-vegetarian. Now, the moment you see your friend eating non-vegetarian food, you get disgusted. You try explaining that why it is harmful for you, why it is harmful for the environment, and you try to judge them that how can you eat an animal? They have life, right? So that judgment is problematic. And we saw when initially thinkers like E.B. Taylor, L.H. Morgan, James Fraser, when they were trying to understand culture, they fell into the trap of ethnocentrism because they came from, you can say, developed society, so to say, and when they encountered that there are communities or culture which is living very simple life, simple societies, so they thought that they are not developed as we are, so they categorized them as savage society, and they created a ladder that from savagery with development you will come to barbarism, and from barbarism you will come to civilization, and we are sitting at civilization, so we are the topmost community of the world. Now this judgment is problematic. This is ethnocentrism. So ethnocentrism, you can say, the tendency to judge other cultures by the standards and values of one's own culture and finding them inferior. The moment you encounter something which you have not seen in your culture, so first it gives you a culture shock. And now you try to justify that this practice is inferior to your practices. So what you are doing here, you have set a standard for way of life, that life should be led by this way because it is your way of life. And the moment you see someone living differently, it becomes problematic for you and you categorize them inferior. That is ethnocentrism, right? If you see the development of ethnocentrism in the 19th century, the Victorian anthropologists like Taylor, Morgan, Fraser, they ranked society on single evolutionary ladder, as I earlier told you: savagery, barbarism, civilization, and they considered European industrial society sat at the top, which is the civilization. So they clearly stated this, that we are the civilization, and every community who is not reached here yet, eventually they will reach here by their development. So in the scale of cultural evolution, few communities are left behind and eventually they will catch up and become like us. This is what we saw in British colonialism. When they came to India and they saw our way of life, they said that these Indian peoples are white man's burden, right? And they wanted to educate us according to their way of education so that we become like them. Now this consideration of self as at the top of the hierarchy is ethnocentrism, right? Everyone has their own way of life. Now you cannot judge them based on your own standards because that other community may not understand or know about your standards, right? So this aspect in anthropology we study as ethnocentrism. So when we talk about classical evolutionists, majorly we call them as armchaired anthropologists who did not do any field work, but they have given theories that how societies develop from savagery to barbarism to civilization, which is ethnocentric in nature. In colonial context, British administrators dismissed Indian marriage customs, child marriage as barbaric without understanding their social logic within the Indian kinship system. So when they came to India, they saw Indian social system, some practices, I'm not saying that those practices were right or wrong, but it was practiced in India for a very long time. So it has a social context attached to it. Now Britishers, they did not understand the context, but they compared it with their own culture and said that this is very barbaric. We need to civilize them, right? Similarly, in the contemporary time, when you see Western media calls female genital mutilation without engaging with the cultural meaning, where women themselves attach to this practice, is also part of ethnocentrism. We'll come to this debate later, that how we can see the compatibility or incompatibility between cultural relativism and ethnocentrism. Basically, when you immediately see someone's cultural practice and give a tag to it that this is wrong or this is inferior, it our culture is better than this, so that is nothing but ethnocentrism. I hope this concept is very clear to you, what is ethnocentrism, right? Now then comes another concept which is called cultural relativism. Now cultural relativism is opposite to ethnocentrism. Ethnocentrism is judging someone else's practices according to your own standard, whereas cultural relativism says that every culture has its own context. You need to understand their practices according to their context, not your own context. Clear? From where this idea came? Now, Franz Boas, the man who changed everything. Now, Franz Boas's idea changed the way anthropologists studied various communities going forward. So, he clearly criticized the methods of classical evolutionist thinkers like E.B. Taylor, L.H. Morgan, and James Fraser, and categorized them as armchaired anthropologists who do not have any exposure to the field work. They don't know what happens in reality. They are sitting in a chamber, they are deciding which culture is better than the other, right? Now, Franz Boas, what he did, you can see the evolution from where his work started around 1887, goes till 1940s, where we see the concept of cultural relativism thriving. But his anthropological theory, what Franz Boas gave, is known as historical particularism. Historical particularism. Now, this theory says that if you want to understand a particular culture, you need to understand its history. Every culture has a long history. Now, you need to know the history of the culture to understand the present day practice. And also, you need to understand particular circumstances in which the culture is existing or the community is existing. Now, this particular circumstances can be their environmental circumstance, can be their political circumstances, can be their economic circumstances, social circumstances. So basically, he is establishing that if you really want to understand a culture, you need to know their context. Without context, you will never understand a culture, right? And when you know the context, there is nothing right and wrong. Everything is relative, right? The moment you think that your own cultural rules are the superior one and everyone else must follow that rules or the institutions, then it becomes problematic. But the moment you try to see each culture in their own context, that becomes relative. From there, the concept of cultural relativism came in, that no culture is superior to any other culture, no community is savage, no community is civilized, everyone is existing in their particular context. And as an anthropologist, it is our duty to understand their history and their particular circumstances, right? So from there, idea of culture relativism came, and it made the discipline very tolerant, that the moment you see someone doing something, you take a pause and try to think that why they are doing this. There must be some reason behind it. That reason may be related to their history or may be related to the particular circumstances they are in. So immediately you will not jump onto the conclusion that this practice is right or this practice is wrong, right? Now, cultural relativism become the methodological foundation of modern anthropology. So from Franz Boas, you can see one of the most important anthropologists in our study who changed the way the fieldwork is done, the change the way theoretical analysis of a particular community was done, right? So it is a, you can say, watershed moment in anthropological theoretical development, which was brought in by Franz Boas, and the concept of cultural relativism. So by understanding cultural relativism, it makes someone very sensitive towards a particular cultural practices. So even as a student of anthropology, you must be very sensitive when you see someone's cultural differences. When you see someone doing something very different from your community, you must take a pause and try to understand in what context they are doing that. You should not jump to a conclusion that this practice is right, this practice is wrong. This is what cultural relativism teaches us, right? Now let us move on to the next aspect. So as I earlier told you, what cultural relativism is. Cultural relativism is the principle that an individual human's belief and activities should be understood by others in terms of that individual's own culture, not according to the standard of your own culture, right? Just opposite to what ethnocentrism was doing, right? So there are basically three types in the cultural relativism. First is descriptive relativism, methodological relativism, normative or moral relativism. Briefly, if you try to understand descriptive relativism, different cultures have different moral codes, as simple as that. So descriptive relativism says that every culture is relatively different from the other culture. Methodological relativism says that when you are studying a particular culture, suspend your own judgments when studying another culture, understand it from within. So the methods you are applying to study a particular culture or particular community, you need to suspend your own judgments. You need to see that practices, see that activities from a distance, keeping yourself away from your own prejudices, your own stereotypes, which your culture has taught you, right? So from there comes the fieldwork principle, which was endorsed by so many anthropologists going forward. Then comes normative or moral relativism. No culture's values are objectively better than another's. All moral standards are culturally relative. So when you apply the moral relativism, that means any moral stand you take may not, or you can say any moral stand you take becomes culturally relative. There is nothing right or wrong in this world. Anyone doing something as a cultural practice, you need to see them or not judge them according to your moral standards. So clearly, moral relativism says that all moral standards are culturally relative. So you cannot you cannot say something is universally wrong. We'll come to this debate in the next slide, that what problems it might have created. So at this moment, you must be thinking that cultural relativism is very good practice, right? Every anthropologist should apply this to understand a particular culture, and every individual also must not judge anyone's cultural practice and be very tolerant towards the practice of others, which is the good part of cultural relativism. But with this idea, what happens at large, there are a lot of exceptions, or you can say evidences, where we see clear human rights violation. Now, the moment you see human rights violation, you cannot justify that it is culturally relative and we should not stop it. There comes a contradiction, whether cultural relativism is right or universal ideas, universal moral standards are right. So if we move on to the next slide. Okay, so this slide explains you the difference between culture relativism and ethnocentrism. We have in an elaborate way explained that. You can see pause the video and see the differences. When you are writing an answer, these points may help you to create a difference between these two fundamentally different topics, ethnocentrism and cultural relativism. Okay, now come to this slide. Where does cultural relativism break down? Now take few examples like female genital mutilation. Communities where culturally this practice is prevalent. Now this becomes, if you see from the lens of cultural relativism, it is a cultural practice with ritual significance, must be understood from within the community. If the community is practicing that willingly, it is part of their culture. Who are we to say that it is right or wrong? But when you consider universal human rights, it violates bodily autonomy and causes irreversible harm, universally condemned by UN Human Rights Framework. So some things may be not accepted at large in the world because there are certain human rights which we all must recognize and must, you can say, follow. But at the same time, when you give the argument of cultural relativism, you cannot say anything because it is their culture, it is their practices, they can do what they want to do, right? So here comes a contradiction, whether we should follow universal human rights or we should see those practices from the lens of cultural relativism. Similarly, other examples like sati, which was prevalent in Indian context, it was practiced because it was a cultural practice. Now, from the human rights point of view, it is clear violation of human rights. So whether it should be abolished or whether we should keep that practice, because from cultural relativist point of view, you cannot judge a particular community about their action. Similarly, caste discrimination, it was part of, you can say, the Varnashram system or Varna system, where we stratified our society based on caste. And with time, there came that inequality became significant, and there are discriminations also. Now, can we say that since it is culturally practiced in Indian social system, so we should allow them to happen, or we should not stop them? For example, untouchability. Can we justify untouchability through cultural relativism? Or should we take a universal human rights stand and say untouchability is wrong, the way we did in our constitution? We abolished it, Article 17, right? And we gave equality in Article 14. Now, so we have to make a balance between these two things. Cultural relativism is correct and right in some context, but there are certain things on which every individual in this world should agree that this should be a basic human rights for an individual. A community guideline or a community practice should not violate those human rights. So that is a question. Where does cultural relativism break down? The moment we see the cultural practices are violating human rights. So a lot of time UPSC also has asked this question to explain that how cultural relativism and human rights are incompatible to each other, critically examine. So you need to give various examples to justify what is the contradiction and explain what is the way forward, right? Now, after understanding ethnocentrism and cultural relativism, there comes the idea of contemporary relevance. A lot of time we say that we must write something, whenever you are writing something on a particular topic, contemporary relevance becomes an important subhead where we need to explain what in the present time, how do we see that particular concept. So how do we see culture in the age of globalization? UPSC has not directly asked this, but specifically they have asked about Arjun Appadurai and William Ogburn. Let us see what their concepts are and how do they see culture in the age of globalization. Now, Arjun Appadurai, what he says that globalization does not create cultural homogeneity. For example, what we understand that with globalization, the interaction between the communities are increasing, so every culture eventually will become similar. He disagrees with that. What he's saying, there are flows which is happening in 5 dimension. What are those dimensions? Like ethnoscape. He says 5 escapes which are there, which creates globalization's flow on various cultures, like ethnospace escapes, technoscapes, media escapes, etc. Ideoscapes. So ideally, he is saying that ethnoscapes means the movement of people. Now, this movement may happen because of migration. The movement may happen because people moving to another country as refugee, taking asylum, or you can say for job they are moving to some other place, and because of that cultural exchanges are happening, right? There can be media escapes. For example, now media, because of social media, now every country's media is somewhere merging. One news from one place immediately translates to another place, or people know about that, right? Or ideoscapes like you can say ideas like democracy, ideas like human rights, ideas like equality, feminism. These things are flowing towards various culture, and it is not that globalization is making it a homogeneous society. It is creating more complex society with the flows of these forces, right? That is the study of Arjun Appadurai when he sees culture in the age of globalization. William Ogburn talks about culture lag. Now, William Ogburn says that culture, if I try to explain this in a very brief way, so there are material aspects. Suppose this is the material aspect which is changing with time, and there are non-material aspects. Non-material aspects, the intangible part. What are those? The ideas, laws, values, customs. Those things are changing at a slower pace. So clearly, material aspect, the technology is changing very fast, and the non-material aspects is changing very slow. So it creates a lag. So this part is the lag. What is this? This is called culture lag. Now, what is happening because of the culture lag? Now, this part is creating social dysfunction. This part is creating various conflicts. This part is creating exploitations. How? Let us take an example to understand this. Suppose AI. AI is a technology. We'll classify this in material, and technology is changing very fast. But do we see the regulations related to AI, laws related to AI? Those things are developing or changing very slow, right? Technology is changing day by day, but the laws are not changing. So there is a lag between them, and that lag is creating exploitation. Suppose someone is using AI to create deep fake videos of some individual. Now that individual is exploited. Why? Is it because of the technology, or is it because of the regulation has not developed? It is the lag, right? That because of lag, because the regulation or law has not evolved to control the technology or misuse of technology, it is creating exploitation. So this way, in past also we have seen, because Ogburn has explained this concept in 1922. So in history we have seen that technological aspects have changed really fast, but the cultural aspect has not changed so rapidly, which has created lag historically also, right? So in the present time, since the technological change is very fast and evident to us, we see these lags evident in our society, right? So the moment you talk about contemporary relevance of culture or culture change, you need to quote these thinkers like Arjun Appadurai and William Ogburn. William Ogburn talks about culture lag. I hope this part is very clear to you. So summarizing what all we have studied in today's or discussed in today's video, it was a very brief video about culture. So we just wanted to give you an idea which all things include in this particular unit. So 150 years of culture debate. At a glance, if you see 1871, E.B. Taylor, he says culture is complex whole, universal, acquired and evolutionary. 1877, Morgan talks about different layers of this ladder, which is savagery, barbarism, civilization, ethnocentric, evolutionary ladder. Franz Boas 1911 talks about historical particularism, that each culture is unique, and from there that idea culture relativism was born. Then Ruth Benedict, one of the student of Franz Boas, talks about patterns of culture, that culture is culture influences personality, or culture is influenced by personality, right? So she comes from culture and personality school. 1966, Geeds, culture as a text, symbolic interpretation of culture. You need to read a culture and there are various layers to it, that is called thick description. You cannot only understand at the superficial level, you need to know each and every layer, and each and every layer has different meaning. So in depth cultural meaning you need to understand of symbols to know that culture properly. Then comes the contemporary part, which is Appadurai talking about culture in the age of globalization, William Ogburn talking about cultural lag. So these are the thinkers which you need to quote when you are talking giving any argument about culture, right? What kind of questions UPSC has asked in the recent times? 2025, drawbacks in assuming culture as integrated closed system. So critical analysis of the characteristics which we saw, culture is an integrated system. So you need to do a critical analysis of that, which you can do in through postmodern theories. Then culture and embodiment. Culture and embodiment basically means that how culture is reflected through human body, how culture is imbibed in human body. You need to quote thinkers like Bourdieu or Marcel Mauss and their study of habitudes and habitus, where we see that human body embodies the social structure they are in, right? So very beautifully they have asked this culture and embodiment concept in a 10 marker. So you can take various examples, like for example some community is tattooing their totem in their society. Now what does that tattoo mean? It is not just ornamentation, it is the story of their culture which they are trying to explain, right? So you need to see body as a cultural text. This is what culture and embodiment means. In 2024, they spoke about asked Appadurai's global cultural economy, where you need to talk about those 5 escapes which we discussed, that how those globalized forces are trying to change culture and how culture is evolving in globalized world. Then 2024, William Ogburn and culture lag. I explained it to you what it means. They asked a direct 10 marker on this. 2023, ethnocentrism superseded by cultural relativism, a historical context they asked. Then they asked in 2022, human rights and cultural relativism, how they are incompatible with each other. With example, you needed to show that. Development of concept of culture in anthropology, which is a broader question, and if you see the essence of this particular video is also to explain the development of concept of culture in anthropology, 150 years of debate, what do we understand by culture, how various thinkers came in explaining what culture is, and also seeing the contemporary relevance of cultural debate as well, right? So whenever you are reading a particular topic, you need to see in the recent years what kind of questions are being asked from that part, which helps you in assessing that whatever you are reading is exam relevant or not. A brief answer structure, you all know how to introduce, then address the core demand of the question in the body, and give a critical analysis of that and conclude your answer. Basic structure, you all know that, right? Scholars you must name in every culture answer, which is E.B. Taylor, Franz Boas, Lewis Morgan, Ruth Benedict, Clifford Geertz, William Ogburn, Arjun Appadurai. Their contributions we have studied or we have seen in the previous slides. So what we covered today, we saw Taylor's foundational definition of culture, then 8 characteristics of culture with examples, or also we saw from where those characteristics came, then difference between culture and civilization, ethnocentrism, what is its origin, what is the mechanism, what the colonial damage has done, then Franz Boas' idea of historical particularism and cultural relativism, and how cultural relativism is different or incompatible with human rights, limits of relativism, then contemporary relevance through the arguments of Appadurai and Ogburn. So I hope this video helps you in getting a context of what culture means in the anthropological studies. This is the second unit in our syllabus where we need to talk about nature of culture and nature of society. So in cultural part, we have to broadly discuss these topics. I wanted to give you an idea that what those concepts mean, and definitely in the classes we are going to elaborate on those concepts to give you a more you can say elaborated descriptive understanding so that you can write your answers well, right? I hope this video helps you in any way. This was it. Thank you so much for listening to this video. Signing off, Sourabh Mishra.